All right, guys. So for today, I'm going to do a basic tier list for you guys regarding female dating preferences. I'm going to rank these concepts in order of how attractive women find them in men. Keep in mind, though, there's a bit of a gray area when it comes to some of these topics. So if you disagree or you want to comment, feel free to leave it down below. All right, let's get straight into it. All right, ambition and drive. I'm going to rate this S tier, but I'm going to add a couple caveats. You have to understand that ambition and drive are only useful as they provide benefits to the woman. That being said, though, it has to go into S tier because a girl needs to feel that her investment is worth it. And the only way for her to justify that is if you're ambitious and have tons of drive. One of the only ways you'll be successful is if you're ambitious and have drive anyways. So it makes perfect sense why this has to be here. It's funny, now that I said that, I'm actually probably going to change my mind and move this down to A tier. This will make sense when I get into the next ones. Confidence, S tier. Now you may be wondering, how is ambition and drive lower than confidence? Once again, a lot of guys are ambitious and driven, but not all of them can make it happen. Confidence, however, is the crucial component to a girl feeling that you have some sort of success on the way. You can be ambitious and lack self-belief. That lack of self-belief will inspire negative feelings within a woman. Confidence, however, especially if it's true confidence and not manufactured, is the ultimate way to quell any female anxiety when she's with you. If you guys don't know by now, you should know that females live in a permanent state of anxiety. This is exactly why they always have somebody to quell this anxiety. This doesn't always need to be a sexual partner, of course. It could be her father, for example. Generally speaking, though, the man that deals with her anxiety the best is typically a sexual partner. All right, so emotional intelligence is tough because you have this standard narrative of what it means and the actual reality of what it means. I'm going to put this into S tier, and then I'm going to explain what actual emotional intelligence is. Emotional intelligence is being able to accurately gauge someone's emotions. The problem with the definition of emotional intelligence from the standard perspective is that a lot of people assume that you don't have emotional intelligence if you don't take care of people's emotions. As in, you always have to prioritize people's emotions over truth or anything else. This is a massive problem in today's society and a direct result of the over-feminization of men. Emotions aren't always the most important thing. Principles and truth are quite often much more important, especially when we go into the long term. As a man, being emotionally intelligent does not mean always caving to her emotions. What it means is being able to accurately determine what her emotions are at all times. If you have a lot of emotional intelligence, it'll give you a lot of power in your relationship, and let's be honest, women want to be submissive to a powerful man. This is, of course, physically and psychologically. All right, so face. Face is tough too because there is some sort of a subjective component to this. I tend to think there's more of a standard when it comes to female beauty as opposed to male beauty. I think a lot of times a feminine standard is put on male beauty, and a lot of guys perceive beautiful men to do well with women, and this is rarely the case. So when we're talking about face, when it comes to men, it's not exactly easy to determine. Overall though, how you make her feel is always going to be way more important than how you look. For that reason, I'm going to put face into B tier. Having an attractive face will open doors for you, but it's definitely nowhere close to enough to get you past the finish line. All right, the next one. Frame. Now, I find frame to be extremely important in the long term. In the short term, it's a little bit tougher because as a girl is getting to know you, even a couple mistakes here and there won't necessarily completely screw you most of the time. This tier list is talking about attraction. If we're trying to optimize for absolute attraction, I'm going to put frame into S tier. Frame and confidence are very similar, but I would argue the frame is the all-encompassing picture of what you create and how the woman sees you. I would argue having a high amount of confidence is indicative of having solid frame. For that reason, I'm actually going to put frame at the top of S tier. Having solid frame is all about consistency. Girls always want to feel that what they have is extremely consistent. That consistency boils down to security. This even goes as far as admitting that you're a cheater. Of course, no girl on earth wants a guy that's a cheater if she could have her perfect world. However, if you're attractive enough and you declare what it is, and she now knows to expect it, it won't be as destabilizing versus if you say you're not one and then you become one. This all has to do with frame. How you present yourself up front, and how well does that picture hold over time. Okay, so next one's hair. I'd argue hair is actually pretty important, and the main reason is that genetic strength. A lot of women see hair as a genetic advantage. Of course, this isn't exclusively the case, but more often than not, hair will make you appear more youthful. For that reason, I'm going to put hair into A tier. Okay, so everyone always talks about height, of course, and a lot of people put way too much emphasis on height. I think the main reason why height is so attractive is purely from a dominance perspective. From the female perspective, if a guy is taller than her, he's always going to be perceived as more dominant. I think height gets an unhealthy amount of attention online, and there's plenty of girls that would go for guys that provide other benefits outside of just pure height. That being said, height opens a ton of doors from an upfront perspective because it's hard to argue dominance when someone is much larger than you are. For that reason, I'm going to put it into A tier, and I'm going to put it above hair. All right, so humor. So this one's very, very subjective in nature, but I'm going to try to break this one down in a way that makes sense. Similar to beauty, humor has a subjective component to it. That being said, the reason why humor is so important is because it's the ability to induce emotions. This puts it in a similar tier as emotional intelligence. Being able to induce emotions, especially positive ones, is one of your ultimate tools when it comes to seducing women. For that reason, I'm going to put it at the top of A tier. The only reason I'm not putting humor into S tier is because a lot of people overemphasize how important humor really is. When a girl likes you a lot, she's always going to find you to be more funny than if she doesn't like you at all. Keep in mind also that humor opens the door to clown behavior. Acting goofy can work against you when it comes to your credibility. It also has the potential to work against your frame. Alright, so next one's interesting as well, intelligence. I'm going to put intelligence right behind frame in S tier, and I'll explain why. Ultimately, from an absolute objective perspective, intelligence is always going to be S++ tier. Here's the reality though, it all depends on how you use said intelligence. That intelligence has to be linked back to something practical it can create. My point is, you could be the most intelligent person in the world and still be a loser. This is exactly why frame is more important than intelligence. There are tons of successful men that appear to be intelligent that might not be as intelligent as we think. In the modern era, a lot of times you'll find that form can be a lot more important than function. Essentially, it's an appeal to vanity. The richest guy in the world will always be perceived as the most intelligent. Alright, so the next one is kindness. This one's quite interesting. From the standard perspective, this one should be going into S tier because all that girls talk about is how they want a kind man. Obviously, anybody with any level of experience with women understands that kindness is really not that important when it comes to attraction alone. Now, you could argue that kindness may be important in a long-term relationship because you can't always just be brutal. That being said, from a visceral attraction perspective, kindness really isn't that important. So for that reason, I'm going to put it into D tier. Now, of course, I'm not saying they should never be kind. That's not the point here. I'm ranking these solely on the basis of how much of an impact it has on female attraction. I only care about what they respond to, and they don't respond that well to kindness, especially early on when you're trying to attract them. In the long term, they'll appreciate your selective kindness when it matters. However, it is not a crucial component to attractiveness. All right, maturity is an interesting one. So this is another one of those categories where a lot of people from a standard perspective will tell you that it should be S++ tier. The truth, unfortunately, is that it's not always the case. Let's be honest, if you're a fully mature masculine man, there's really not that much space for fun. Fun and maturity tend to be at opposite ends of the spectrum. Women typically indulge more in fun activities than serious activities. When they're around you, they want to see that you have a fun side or a less mature side. While maturity is very important when it comes to success, career, goals, things like this, it's not necessarily the most important when it comes to getting attraction from females. Obviously, there's a spectrum to this because if you're extremely immature as a guy and a girl sees it, it can also turn her off. This is one of those cases where you have to hit the sweet spot if your goal is to attract a woman. For that reason, I'm going to put it into B tier. Alright, so arguably one of the most controversial items on this list, money. Ask most guys online and they'll say that money belongs in God tier, beyond anything else. Now, I understand the classic framework as to why guys believe money is the most important thing. Guys that have money can afford to pay for experiences that women like to have. Now, of course, there's some truth in this, but the problem is this. There's tons of dorks out there that have money that still don't know how to have a good time and experience the nice things in life with that money. Sure, girls may use some of these guys to get a really nice experience, but they'll never truly love that guy. This is why, ironically, money is not nearly as important as a lot of guys like to think. Money, of course, opens tons of doors, and you're never going to get into certain rooms unless you have access to money. The depth of experience you can create with money is much deeper than if you have no money. But ultimately speaking, money is simply an amplifier to what you can already create. If you can't emotionally stimulate a girl without money, you sure as hell won't be able to do it with money. This is also why all the greatest players always say the same thing. I was always getting them even before I had money. Long-term money helps to create the exact life you want, free of shackles. In the short term, though, it will only amplify what you're already good at. For this reason, I'm going to put it into A tier, right above ambition and drive. Money is the practical proof of your ambition and drive, so it has to be above ambition and drive. Alright, so personality. Personality is really annoying because I think a lot of people use this one as a cope as well. I may not have much, but I have a great personality. This one's so incredibly subjective and it has so many different types of meanings. It really really has no meaning at all. I think what most people are referring to when they're talking about personality is how enjoyable a person is to be around. That's it. I think it can also extend into a person's aura. If a person has a lot of presence in the space they're in, I think a lot of people will interpret that as having a lot of personality. This one's really tough now. So which definition am I going to use? And then based on that definition, I have to place it somewhere. What I'll probably do for this one is I'll leave it as a gray area. I'll use the generally accepted definition of personality as people tend to see it from a mainstream perspective, and I'm going to rank it from that. Aura, vibe, fun to be around. From that perspective, I'll put it into A tier right underneath humor. Shared values. Okay, so this one is quite interesting. A lot of people put so much emphasis on this. We have so much in common. Honestly, when it comes to female attraction, however, shared values are not important at all because from a masculine and feminine perspective, we really do want the opposite thing. Shared values might be important from a long-term perspective when you're trying to stay with someone forever. When it comes to attraction alone, however, what you'll find is that the opposites attract logic actually applies much more. For that reason, shared values don't really matter that much. However, sometimes it helps a little bit as a social lubricant when you're meeting somebody and you like something mutually or whatever. For that reason, I'm going to put it to C tier. Social status. So this one's very important. I'd argue it's actually more important now than money even because there's a lot of lames that have tons of money, but they don't know how to talk. Having social status, however, bundles up a lot of things that you're capable of into one package. Social status can even be seen as social proof, of course. If you've been watching my channel for a while now, you probably would have realized that social proof is quite important. For that reason, I'm going to put social status right behind frame. People have a tendency to be so weak when it comes to peer pressure. If everybody else likes it, there's got to be a reason for that. This potentially opens more doors than anything else. Women, of course, are not beyond vanity. This, of course, is the core behind the whole celebrity crush thing I've talked about many times. What can create more attraction in women other than looking up at a guy and saying, he's mine, I have him? At this point, I'm going to put social status at the top of S tier. Having a high amount of social status is only possible when you execute frame properly. All right, vulnerability. So the truth is, a lot of people are going to disagree with this, of course, but vulnerability is D tier. When it comes to female attraction, being vulnerable will only open doors to problems. Now, some guys are really good at using vulnerability very selectively to try to bring down the guard. But these are very few guys that are very confident and secure, so if they do release a little bit of vulnerability, it really doesn't affect them negatively in any way. Most guys reveal way too much about themselves and their weaknesses when they choose to be vulnerable to women. Most often, when guys do this, all they're doing is destroying frame and killing the image that the girl had of him. Once that image is destroyed, the attraction typically goes with it. Okay, so the final one is style. Now, I like style personally because I think it's a great way to be individual in a sense. At the same time though, I don't think it's overly important. I think style is a great cherry on top of the cake. It can do a great job of differentiating you, but at the same time, it could also niche you down too much. That being said, most guys are heavily underutilizing this. Keep in mind, style also has an impact on your overarching frame, so it's something you need to consider as a component. For that reason, I'm going to put into A tier right behind money. Alright guys, that concludes today's tier list. If you have any questions or comments, feel free to leave them down below. As always, don't forget to like and subscribe. Also make sure to check my links in the description below. I'll see you guys next time.